Welcome on inside yet another edition of the Business of Social podcast powered by STN Digital. I'm your host, David Brickley. Each and every show, we dig in to the ever-changing digital, social, and marketing landscape. This show is no different. Producer Will, we have a mini pod edition that I'm excited about. We also have a special guest edition that I'm excited about. But we have Liz Ninivaggi. She is our Director of Data and Strategy. And of course, Producer Will, who also oversees a lot of our partnerships here at STN Digital. But we all wanted to come together because we recently watched The Social Dilemma. We all had some hot takes and some interesting takeaways from The Social Dilemma. Those that you do not know, been living under a rock. It's on Netflix. It's a 2020 American docudrama, which I agree with that drama part of it as well. It's directed by Jeff Orlowski, and it is, I don't know if you guys saw this, the most popular movie in September on Netflix. The first time a documentary has ever been the most popular movie on Netflix. Producer Will, I'm sure you've heard a lot of your friends and family talk about this around the horn.
Yeah, I'm surprised that it's the first documentary to have that for Netflix. That's off the bat. But the first thing that caught me was how many big names and former like high-level guys they had at Google, YouTube. Engineers. I thought it was just going to be that main guy kind of speaking off the cuff, but they really did a good job of getting a lot of former people on there that have a lot of knowledge. And like, I forget the girl's name, but she was like early on the Instagram team. She had a lot of good points. And then the guy towards the end who was like the VP of growth at Facebook when they first started. So a lot of big names there.
Liz, I know you're also a huge fan of Tiger King. I'm sure you're surprised that Tiger King wasn't the number one documentary, but
that's what I was thinking.
The Social Dilemma took it.
Yeah, I would assume that the reason it not only became so popular so fast is it's something that literally affects everyone. Everyone has a connection or relationship to social media in some way, whether you don't have accounts or you're constantly using it. It is something that is probably the most, what we usually tell our clients, it's one of the most used platforms in the world.
Yep.
There's no surprises there. I think it appeals to the widest audience possible. So,
and interesting timing. They dropped this right before a historic election, of course, which I'm sure was part of their strategy. And yeah, those of you that have not seen it, this is going to be a spoiler edition. So if you don't want to hear anything about this documentary, then I guess you got to turn it off and come back and listen to us later. But I will give you context and just kind of like, I guess, build this foundation so we can talk more about it. So their tagline for this, as you guys know, The Social Dilemma was the technology that connects us also controls us. In short, it's a documentary drama hybrid more than anything else and examines the various ways that social and social networking companies have, quote unquote, manipulated the human psychology to rewire the human brain and what that means for society in general. Liz, they talked a lot about mental health, dopamine, what that means, addiction, how conspiracy theories can now, travel farther than they ever have before. I will say, before we dive into this, one of my favorite professors at San Diego State, his wife does documentaries, and he always told me, remember, documentaries are made to make you feel, not so much inform. So although there's some stats and there's information in this documentary, I think we can tell they were pulling on some of the emotional heartstrings. So I'll start with that. I guess let's just start with our overall thoughts. Liz, I'll start with you. Maybe your main takeaways from all this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So my first thought was I was super excited watching it. I've never watched anything more relatable to my job ever.
Again, Director of Data and Strategy. You're in it every day. Yeah.
So I'm finally like, well, finally people will understand what I do for a living.
Yeah.
My overall thoughts is that they had a lot of amazing points. I liked how there was kind of a two-side approach. They did touch on, obviously, the positives of social media and also making points about the negative side. But I think obviously the narrative was, kind of the negativity and kind of the havoc that social media has caused when they're saying that social media has taken a life of its own. I didn't find some of the statements to be exactly accurate in terms of the way they just pinpointed everything towards social.
Right.
I think a lot of it has to do also with just how our society has evolved, and social is a huge part of that. It's the way that we interact and connect with our community. But our society has had so much change in the past 20 years that also affects what's going on right
Of course.
now when it comes to
Or magnifies those different, vulnerabilities.
exactly with the way that we consume news and the type of news that we consume and what we crave as humans. That's all just based on our culture too. So
and I have a lot of analogies on that. Like, what did the 24/7 news cycle do to our society? Like that, we can talk about that for an hour and a half as well. I want to get into each one of these buckets with you guys, but Will, I'll let you kind of have the first or second thought, I guess, on your overall takeaways.
Yeah, I was really interested to see. This is something that Dan Le Batard says a lot, and that our phones and social media is the biggest addiction that nobody talks about in America, which I think is incredibly true. And I was just interested to see like kind of the science that goes into it. Because I mean, you go to a red light or you go anywhere, people are on their phones. Any sport, like you look at a sporting event now, people courtside are on their phones. Everyone's on their phone all the time. And we all know why, because it's addicting and you want to see the next thing. But it was really interesting to hear kind of how that was done intentionally and how they're ramping it up. That guy mentioned the dials and how they wanted to get more followers in any given country. And I just found the science behind that really interesting, and I thought they did a good job. And like Liz said, they kind of covered positive and negative, and of course skewed 80% negative, I would say. But the science and kind of how it was created to make your brain do that, I found really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. The 80% negative for sure. I think, Liz and I were kind of talking on Twitter, believe it or not, like live tweeting over the weekend, I think at one point. But let's start with the algorithms, because it's something that we know day in and day out. We live in this world, obviously STN being a social first marketing agency. We know a lot about algorithms. This is why Liz and I were laughing about this. The way they depicted this in the documentary with the dude from Mad Men kind of like pulling the levers and in real time, like he hasn't checked his phone in 2 hours. Let's send him a DM from his ex-girlfriend, which is silly in nature. And that's obviously not how it works at all. But I guess, Liz, I guess for the layman's term, if we're talking to our grandmother who's 83 years old that has no idea how AI or algorithm or machine learning works, I mean, I get the analogy, I guess, but it was pretty silly in nature.
It was silly. I definitely laughed when that part came on, especially when one of my favorite scenes was when they were doing the ad auction and they were like delivering ad for $3.50.
Yeah. And like the lifeless body, like moving, like that was really, again, they're pulling on the emotional heartstrings there for sure. But
you were in the back of my mind during all those scenes. Like I was wondering, like, is that a good deal for them? Like, is the 383?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I wonder if Liz would agree with that.
Liz would have been like, I could have got him 190. Yeah, exactly.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like David said, if you're going to explain it to someone who has no concept of what an algorithm is,
right,
I think it did the job. However, I think the biggest part that I had problems with is that an algorithm is a computer. It would have made more sense for them to have little computers literally pressing the buttons. It's not people making these decisions. It's machine learning. And I think that it was kind of a scary depiction of how the algorithm knows us so well. However, I kind of have an issue with that because I feel as if our algorithms are just becoming more advanced, but they're becoming more advanced in one way to make sure that we're seeing the news and the content and the media that we should be seeing. Facebook obviously had just updated their algorithm in 2019 to make sure that they're providing their users with more meaningful content. So they send out surveys to people to say, what pages do you want to see content from? So while it is in the hands of a computer, Facebook is already taking those steps to make it more personalized and less about the computer deciding and what you as a user truly want.
Yeah, and I think, Will, we always talk about the Lakers on this show. So, if I constantly like LeBron dunks on the Laker accounts on Instagram. So if Nike serves me up with an ad about Nike LeBrons, I'm not mad at that. I'm actually, thank you. Thank you for letting me know that a new LeBron dropped. There's positives in the algorithm. We can get into the negatives in a second. But I guess for Will, for you, that's not really in the data every single day. Did any part of that, was that any learning for you, or did you thought that was kind of an interesting way they showed it?
No, I was thinking about that today. I was watching a video on YouTube and it ended and they fed me another video, of course, like they're supposed to.
Yep.
And I wanted to watch it. And I was like, oh, thank you. I actually didn't know this and I wanted to click on it. So I guess you could take that as a positive, the negative being I'm spending more time on my phone, I guess. But no, I think Liz nailed it. It's a lot of what they want you to see, and everyone, I think algorithm is like the buzzword of the 2010s. Like nobody really knows what an algorithm is, but we kind of understand on a high level. but it's easy to say like, oh, they updated the algorithm, they changed the algorithm this.
I think and I want to get into different topics of this documentary, but the big thing that I took away from this was, the algorithms, obviously was no news to me. It really gets down to the truth. Like, if we can't agree that the world is round, if we can't agree that putting your knee on somebody's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds is wrong, and there's always like two sides of every story. And I think the reason that is the conspiracy theorists or whatever you want to talk about, when you talk about an algorithm, CNN.com, NBC Sports, and Bloomberg is right there with I hate Democrats, I hate Republicans.com. Anybody can start a website. They can make a decently looking blog on Squarespace or Wix for $20, and they can start pushing news and these different videos. So if you have a crazy theory, there's somebody out there that can break down that theory for you and say how much you're right. So, and that's also to Liz's point, that's no different than Fox News and CNBC. They tell you what you want to hear, but that's where the algorithm, I think, has, I guess somewhat hurt society, is if you like the video that says, the world is flat, Facebook, Twitter, these different social that will probably start sending you more videos that the world is flat, and therefore it just kind of develops a psychosis of, see, I told you, I read this every single day, it comes across my feed, and therefore that's the scary part, or the good and bad of algorithms, I think.
But that's never going to change, right? Because now you have people on both sides of whatever issue who every single second can give you their opinion, and no matter what you do, they can just keep, and they'll find more people, like they said, they'll just give you more people to join you.
But that's what's different, I think, and the reason why the documentary is important and not so much just like propaganda or whatever, is that's the important thing through technology, where at least with television, you had to have millions, if not billions of dollars to start a television network and hire a host and have a studio and have satellites and all these different things to like develop a news channel. Now you need $5 in a theory and you can start posting stuff, right? So that's the scary thing about the truth. If everything is kind of on the same playing field and there's no credibility of who actually is a news organization and who's just try to push a conspiracy theorist, that's where I think the algorithm can kind of like get into the psychology of some people, Liz.
Right. And just thinking about and talking about AI and Facebook and their statements, obviously the big dispute last year or the past few years has been their influence on the political election of 2016 and how they're taking all these steps to move forward. They're putting more restrictions on political advertising, but they're not technically taking it away, so it's still here.
Right.
And I think that one of the quotes that I liked from the documentary was about AI being kind of the good thing about what's going to happen and the good changes, but there's also a negative side to AI, especially when it's going to be looking through like fake news and how that's going to happen. AI is going to change. It already is changing our society, but as they kind of mentioned with that comparison to the Terminator, it's not technically like robots, but it can be as scary as that. And I think that was also an interesting point that they brought up.
Well, that was the guy that showed up at the pizza place, right? Like, and I guess is the final answer to that. Like, you just have to hope that people are just smart enough to figure out there's not a pizza place in New York.
See, that's where I struggle, because I don't think that. I don't think.
No, that'll never happen.
Yeah, well, that and all, but even you guys even know with our parents, right? Like, they didn't grow up like we did with the phone in their hand. And I went home the other day and I love my parents. My grandma was there. It was great. But I was a freaking Apple Genius bar. I had 9 different IT tickets I had to solve. Whether it's the HDMI cord wasn't working and my messages aren't where my mail is not attached to my phone, and all this. But I say that because I don't think, I don't want to say majority, but I think there's a large portion of our population that can't decipher, fake news versus real news. And also, I don't want to get too much into this right now, but when you talk about deep fakes that are starting to come out, and you guys have seen some of this audio stuff, I'm sure that's come out, where you can have Barack Obama or Joe Rogan, anybody that has a lot of audio, well, I guess I should watch out too. Any audio or any podcasting, you've almost said, Barack Obama, Joe Rogan has almost said every word in the dictionary at this point with all the content they produce. And now with audio and AI learning, like Liz talked about, you can, move their words around and make them say things they never said. So then you can start posting videos like, hey, did you hear what Barack said last night at this event? And it's literally fabrication of former talks he gave in history. So much like Barack dubs, right? But
how many times have your mom or parents sent you a clearly photoshopped image and it's like, did you see this? This is unbelievable. It's like, this is fake. Like, no, it's not. I'm looking right at it. It's a picture. Like, and that's just widespread across the country, across the world, of people who can't, like you said, they didn't grow up with this. They don't understand it, and they can't decipher what's
There's
real.
A famous Joe Biden video that when he's on The View, and obviously there's been a lot of talk about him not being mentally stable or be fit for office, but it was an edited clip that really showed him looking like he was stuttering a lot and was like confused and wasn't answering the questions. But all it was someone took the actual interview and then just cut back to him looking confused. And it was an edit meant to manipulate, or an edit meant for propaganda, if you will. And that probably got shared millions and millions and millions of times. And that video, I think, helped the narrative of, hey, Joe Biden can't, you know what I'm saying? So that's the stuff that the algorithm may push and starts to affect society based on a fake video.
Yeah. And looking at just digital in general, when you compare, advertising specifically, the relevance of digital advertising just is so incredibly more powerful than anything traditional.
Yep.
But that also applies to political advertising.
Yep.
Meaning if I looked at a sign on the freeway that may not speak to me, I may not even know what this brand is or have any idea, versus when you're receiving an ad from, or getting served an ad from any of the social channels, it should have some relevance to who you are. While this is a bad thing, it is also considerably a good thing, because again, we're not challenging people's views. We're giving them the content that they want, especially when it comes to their political beliefs. However, I think in terms of just general advertising, that was something they didn't really cover. Just the specific ways that you can really target people. Obviously, that gets into the other question of data, data privacy, but think about like how much it's changed our world and how much it's probably changed our economy. I mean, billions of media dollars online are spent billions a year. It's going to project it to be higher than traditional, and I think it already is. So,
well, and listen, that's the coolest thing about our job, right? We can, for our clients, if you want to market towards a certain demographic, we can guarantee that the people that you want to hit, a 30-year-old Laker fan in San Diego, like I can get you Will Kelly. I can get you.
And that is the true definition of what marketing should be.
Yes.
Essentially.
So that's trust me, that's the amazing thing and stuff I think we geek out over every day. And we're always, let's think about the positives. They touched on it briefly about how social has changed the world in positive ways. But let's just look at George Floyd, for instance. The GoFundMe for George Floyd's wife raised $14.7 million. Like, though that family went through one of the most tragic incidents that you can ever imagine, and now they don't have to worry about money for a very, very long time for their family. That's incredible. Like, that's social media in its essence. We've also, seen, like they mentioned, reunite family members, the Black Lives Matter March, 50 states, over 18 countries, people marching for human rights. That's all based on social media and Facebook groups and Twitter hashtags. And that stuff is what excites me so much about social media. But like you said, in every industry, there's a yin and there's a yang. And obviously they focused on what's not good about that. And also it's nice. We all have jobs because of this, this amazing social industry, right? I wanted to quickly talk on teen girls, because they mentioned some pretty unfortunate stats that depression and anxiety is up 62% among older teen girls since 2011, suicide up 75%, and for preteen girls, which is really alarming, the equivalent figures are 189% and 151% of both the depression, anxiety, and suicide stat. Those stats are for the United States, of course, but similar data across the globe. Liz, I'd love to get your thoughts on that part of social, and we talk about Instagram removing likes and all these different things, but we'd love to get your initial thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a huge mental health advocate. I speak for mental health from personal experience, but also for others. And I think that there is absolutely no lie. Social media has disrupted our overall mental health. The way that we need instant gratification has changed the way our brain works, which isn't crazy. For me, I think the biggest problem is the filtering. and this kind of prototype for women that's been pushed. It used to be pushed in magazines, and
100%. When you grew up, it was Vogue and magazines and Photoshop. Yeah, exactly.
And it's just this unrealistic standard, and it's becoming even more unrealistic with Photoshop, Facetune, and these are
Kardashians aren't helping us either.
Yes, not helping at all. So I think as a solution to that, there needs to be bans of any sort of like the way, if we can have AI remove fake news and we can have AI determine if you photoshopped your picture. I think that there's got to be bans on what certain followers can post. People with large following, like for example, Khloe Kardashian posted a photo of herself that looked nothing like her.
Yeah.
And it just sparked this conversation of not only for her mental health and worrying about her, but for everyone else that she's projecting to.
Yeah. So
that's kind of what I hope will be changed.
And I think too, like, Will, you mentioned before we started the podcast, which was very telling to me too, is like, didn't they say technology has grown 10,000% in the last 25 years?
I think it was more than that. I forget like how he quantified it, but it was like your car used to be able to go 50 miles an hour.
Now it goes 100. Yeah.
And your phone is like a billion or a trillion. Or
right.
whatever,
something crazy. And I think that's the key, right, Liz? Like, we know that, kids probably shouldn't get behind the wheel of a car until 16 years old.
Yes.
Once they get behind the wheel of the car after their written and driving test, for 6 months, they probably should drive alone and not, injure any of their friends as they get used to this said vehicle that can, do a lot of damage if you do it the wrong way. So as a society, we've determined that. We determined, you know what? You should probably be 18 until you start smoking cigarettes. We don't want to get, little 11-year-olds addicted, especially as they're growing and as they're developing. And I think we're the first generation to really grow up with this stuff. I think I launched my Facebook account like literally the year that I was a senior in high school or the year after. We don't know. I don't think we know what that answer is yet. And I would not be... if there's legislation that gets passed that you can't have a cell phone or you can't be on social media until you're 14, 15 years old, whatever that may be, that wouldn't surprise me, because when the brain is developing and you're talking about, to your point, depression, anxiety, self-worth, there's probably an argument to be made that following a bunch of models on Instagram is probably not great for an 11-year-old girl.
Yeah, absolutely. And now they're developing ways to kind of combat this. I do regular kind of phone detoxes where I will not use Instagram for a couple weeks, and it really, really helps. And also with your point, I liked in the movie how they said the girl had a cell phone and she was 11. I couldn't have a cell phone till I was 15. And I think that's a point that you're making. These kids are on their phones, not even when they're 11, when they're 5 or 6, when these parents are handing iPads out. I mean,
my mom made a great point though. And she's like, what am I supposed to do? Every other kid has it. And I've seen from like my little cousins and nephews and stuff. That's the truth. Like you think like, okay, this kid's only 11. Like, yeah, well, every other kid in their grade has one.
And I think it goes back to more. Listen, when I was growing up, my parents only allowed me to play like a certain amount of hours of video games per day. I couldn't be in there all day for 13 hours, but I can play for an hour or two. But it wasn't the video games company's fault, or nor was it their responsibility, I think, to have a mechanism that turns off the video game after 3 hours, or to scan my face and make sure that I'm above a certain age. So I do think it's parenting, but I don't think parents, including myself, I don't know what the answer is. And there needs to be more education and probably more case studies. But we're the first generation that's going through this, where they're going to look back 1,000 years and they're like, Jesus, like they allowed freaking 13-year-olds to sign up for Facebook. Like they were crazy back then. They were pretty savage,
Yes, and I know that there are certain restrictions you can have on your phone. So when I first got my phone, I could only call certain people.
Yeah.
No internet. So there's definitely easy ways to combat this. I really do believe it's in, the parents' responsibility, and it's up to them whether, they decide they want their kids to be exposed to the internet at a young age. I mean, it's not only, I think that another big point is that they didn't really talk much about the internet as a whole, more about social, but the internet as a whole has definitely affected everything that's going on. And I feel like they kind of just blamed it on social, and it's definitely not just social media. It's the internet in general.
And that's what you made a great point. Like, it was magazines when you're growing up, this I guess notion of this impossible standard to reach, especially when these beautiful models were also photoshopped and color corrected, and it just they can't even look that good, let alone anybody else. And same with the 24/7 news cycle once cable news came into effect. So I like how Liz started this podcast, which this is a society problem, and to like focus right on social, it's impossible to say. It's impossible to say that depression and anxiety up 62% in teen girls. It's just because of Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. That you can't possibly say that. There's no doubt it's a part of it, but it's definitely a societal thing. And again, what are the answers? And I think since we're almost the lab rats in a way, this first generation of social media. Think about it. I mean, Facebook launched in 2004. Instagram like what, 2008 or something like that. This is not a long time ago. So we only have like 15 years of data, which is not enough to determine, what is a healthy amount and what is not a healthy amount.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, again, as we move forward with social media, and it's all based on learning. It's like learning from what worked and what didn't work is how we evolve as a society in terms of everything. Think about the evolution of planes. I mean, it's kind of the same thing. Well,
and also too, like, don't I guess forget about our ability now to self-educate. I mean, think about how important that is when we have the K through 12 system and you have your textbooks, and that used to be it. Like whatever the K through 12, whatever the textbook decided to write about, that's what you learned about. I think a lot of us not to get too off topic, but a lot of us like growing up, like I feel like we studied Christopher Columbus for 3.5 weeks, but we studied Juneteenth and Martin Luther King for a day, right? Like it's just interesting how those history books were written. But now you can dive in yourself and say, I'm going to educate myself on mental health. I'm going to educate myself on Black history. I'm going to educate myself on whatever it may be. And that's a pretty incredible tool to be able to have so you can educate yourself on those different areas.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that, again, the fake news part of this, it does come kind of like a two-edged sword. While there's so much more information readily available to us and where we can educate ourselves, there's also a lot of misinformation, and that's just fueling the fire.
Right, and that's what, I guess that's when I watched this entire thing, that's the one thing I took away from. There were some parts where I was kind of like rolling my eyes, like to your guys' point, but the one part where I was shaking my head in agreement is, and I'll use this example, I think, when JFK was assassinated, I think if you polled the country, 99.9% of people would say this is a terrible, tragic, absolutely horrific thing. I don't know if we can ever get. I think if the JFK assassination happened in this country at this time in 2020, regardless if he was well liked or what have you, there would be like this polar opposite of, yeah, but you don't realize this, and this is why it happened, this is why it's good, this is why it's bad, instead of, again, agreeing on a central truth, like we all agree this is terrible, rather than like the red versus blue or it seems like there's a devil's advocate to everything, even if there should not be. Which that's kind of where it gets scary, right?
But how do you know if you're 15 years old, if you're 50, if you're 30, how do you know what is reliable, what is a trustworthy news source, and whether that's TV or social or YouTube, what you don't know.
Yeah.
And you want to assume best intention, but you're right. You could have 50% of the people say like, oh, well, JFK was a bad guy and I disagree with his policies, whatever. And it's like, well, that's not the issue here. And
the issue is a man was assassinated. Can we agree that's bad?
You
exactly.
Find people making that point, and that could be with anything. Like, oh, the color red is a horrible color, and you can find people, you know what I mean? So, and I don't know the answer to that.
And I do think, before what I said about society, I do believe that, again, this is a lot about the effects our society has, and especially the last 4 years. There's no disagreeing that we have been so divided within our country, and that is also affecting social media, and that's affecting the way we communicate with our fellow Americans, and that just is fueled again by the fire of social media.
Yep.
They said in the doc, right? Like I don't remember if it was a scientific point, but it was like people are no longer friends now because of what their friends post on social media. Versus
that never used to be the case. Like I knew people that voted for Bush or Gore, but it wasn't go after yourself. I'll never talk to you again. That's a divisiveness for sure. That, to Liz's point, it's not social media so much, but it magnifies itself, and now you can get in a group that says I hate this person or let's do X. I think the one thing that I was kind of disappointed about, and I read the CNBC review of The Social Dilemma, was they really didn't offer too many solutions. I mean, I was kind of expecting these engineers that created these systems to maybe give us like, this is what I would recommend as a consultant. If I was talking about Mark Zuckerberg or whatever, here's what I would do. Or maybe some parenting advice like, hey, based on our research, we think that there really shouldn't be a phone in a young girl or young man's hand until X. But they really didn't do that. So I wanted to kind of like, I guess, get your guys' thoughts on maybe some solutions or some positivity we can learn from this. And I'll start by saying, I think the politics stuff is really where it gets messy. And I would love to see a place where politicians can't advertise at all, because it really becomes whoever has the most money ends up getting the most votes. But I would agree, I would argue that social media for sure, but even television ads, radio ads, maybe there's some type of media discourse we can have where people have equal time and things like that, which is part of the law as well. But if you just have the ability to drop $100 million in the Facebook ads to push a narrative of how terrible the other guy is without even focusing on what you're going to do for the country, that I think is not so much a social issue, but has always been the issue. And that would mean super PACs as well. And that would mean it gets messy, but I think that's probably one solution or one thing that we have to reform is probably that part.
Yeah, I think for one solution and one good point that I really was aligned with was the fact that none of these companies are regulated in a way that other industries are.
Yep.
And as mentioned, these are businesses. They profit off of you and they profit off of your time.
Yep.
So
again, nicotine has a regulation that you can't sell to kids under 18. Like that's a regulation because they weren't going to self-regulate themselves on that, right? Yeah.
Exactly. They are. I mean, think about how much money Facebook has. The power of money in this country, which is another separate issue, does affect your standing with the law. And I think we're challenging that now, but I think the regulations really needs to start. They're starting conversations now with Congress and Senate, but I think that really needs to be the biggest focus, at least moving forward in the next few years.
Yep.
Well, how long did it take alcohol and tobacco to,
right.
In an alcohol commercial, you can't show someone consuming it. You can crack it and cheers it from, but you cannot take a sip of beer in a commercial. So is it just a slow trickle to, you can say your platform, but maybe not slander the other person or something like that. But that's probably going to take a long, long time to.
Facebook has taken steps. I'm not trying to take Facebook's side, but they have taken steps, especially with their advertising options. You are no longer allowed to target by demographic. You used to be able to target by ethnic group. There's definitely a lot more restrictions for political advertising. I think they said that there are going to be no new ads allowed on Facebook the week before the election. I don't really know how that's going to affect anything if you're running an ad simultaneously for 3 weeks.
Yeah, but also too, like I don't know how much that helps if you've been running ads for the 4 months prior. But
but the voting
period is almost over by that.
Yeah.
But there are certain restrictions on Facebook. You can't market certain things. Google has the same. I mean, they are taking the small steps, but they're nothing that's going to be detrimental to their profit and their business.
But Liz, if you're Facebook and I'm Snapchat, and it's like, hey, you know what? Like, good for Liz. She just decided to remove all political ads and. Well, I'm open for business, and I just made $200 million on ads. If someone's at Facebook, you know what? We need to get these ads back.
Yeah.
I was just talking on Twitter that they will never do this. They will never shut down political advertising themselves. They make an absurd amount of money. So that is their profit. That's their business. Obviously, a business is going to come and say, we care about the users, but profit is really
and that's a complex problem again, because again, even if you shut off for politicians, super PACs come in with their hundreds of millions.
Yep.
And that's what lobbyists are for. I mean, there's a reason there's a dialogue about climate change, because obviously there's billions and billions of dollars every year from the oil companies to have a different narrative on that, because that's not good for their business. I think LA, you guys may know this, used to have a subway system very similar to New York. But GM bought it and filled it up with concrete because that was not going to help their bottom line. They wanted people to drive cars in California and not use the subway system. So this has been, a complex issue for quite some time. But yeah, I think I totally agree with what you guys are saying on that point. What did you guys, I guess, after watching this, I'll share with you what I did, but is there anything differently? Obviously, when you watch it, it's kind of scary and you like want to throw your phone across the room like initially. But is there any changes that you've made? Say it again.
Did you check your screen time? But
the only problem with my screen time is I need white noise to fall asleep. So I usually play YouTube, and that'll be like 8 hours of YouTube that isn't a representation of my screen time. Either way, it's probably a little unhealthy. But did you guys make any immediate changes after kind of being woke up a little bit?
So for me, I actually have been making changes slowly before I started watching this documentary. Obviously, I work in social media, so I have to be on social for some extent. However, for me, I have done my social media detoxes. I'm really leaning less away from Instagram recently. I started unfollowing all of these influencers that I was like, why am I following this person if they don't make me feel good? And there's this kind of movement coming.
It's so funny you say that, Liz, because during COVID, like I was looking for feeds that just spreaded positivity. Because, you know, just the news, which is true, is like this many people died, or like what if COVID mutates and makes it even worse? Like just watching that every day affects your psyche. And I'm like, I wanted to follow a bunch of puppies that were like, you know, playing in flowers. So I literally went out and looked for those accounts. So like, I want to mix up my feed a little bit. Yeah.
Absolutely. And now there's, like I said, there's this whole new movement, and it's actually coming through mostly on TikTok, which is amazing because I love TikTok. I think it's great. But now it's like psychology. I'm following psychologists on Instagram versus following an Instagram influencer. And those people that's amazing. That's the good of social media, of people using their actual credentials to give people.
I love that. I love that advice, Liz, is like, be cognizant of what's showing up in your feed and who your followers are. And literally by, you know, deleting 7 people and adding a new 7 people and or brands, it can affect your mental mindset on a daily basis just by, it's like changing the channel. You don't want to watch, you know, news all day, so you change it to Comedy Central and all of a sudden you're laughing at a Chris Rock episode or something.
Yep. I unfollowed all the Kardashians. I had to do it. It was the best thing for my health.
Yeah. Will?
I did a couple things similar to Liz. I unfollowed a good amount of people. I'm way before the documentary, but I moved my social apps to like the back page of my phone, because a lot of times I'll open my phone, it's like the first thing and I click it. I checked my screen time, which was a little shocking.
A little alarming.
I tell myself it's a lot of podcasts and texting, but something that I've done a couple of times, like just sitting on the couch, is Becca and my girlfriend will be looking at her phone, like on Instagram stories. And I'm like, let's see how long it takes us to like learn something or gain some knowledge or see something.
I like that.
And I'm not kidding you. It's 30 minutes of like, here's me on a vacation, or, you know, whatever, just typical social media stuff. So I've tried to move, like Liz said, we obviously have to have these, you know, an extent for our jobs, but if you're going to be on there, try and keep it positive. And then actually the great Kanye West about a year ago said your phone should be like a hammer. And he actually had like a hammer phone case. And he's like, you don't pick up a hammer like just 20 times throughout the day. You pick it up, you need to use it, you get what you need out of it, and you put it back in your tool case. So I kind of try to give myself that mentality of like, pick this up, use it as needed, and then put it down, because the more you're on it, it's not great for your mental health, your life, all that kind of stuff.
Liz, when you agreed to do this podcast, did you think Will Kelly was going to drop Kanye West quotes and inspiration? I wasn't ready for that.
I never know what Will Kelly is.
That's true.
I wouldn't call it inspiration.
It's a solid point.
Yeah, that really resonated with
me. The great Cardi B once said.
Yeah.
I mean, would you carry a screwdriver around with you 24 hours a day? No, but you'd use it when you need to use it.
I mean, listen, Kanye West has some amazing things he says. I'll agree. All right. You know what I did was I went through all my apps and I turned notifications off. What I noticed is even like YouTube, like even though it's kind of silly how they're like, wait, he hasn't opened up Instagram, or he hasn't opened up his phone for 3 days. Let's send him his ex-girlfriend getting like, what's it called, in a relationship or whatever. And what I realized is even like with like Uber, like $3 off tonight, and Postmates, like, hey, you're close by this restaurant, like get a free delivery. It's constant. And you don't really think about it, but it's just like, and that I think allows you to pick your phone more. So I turned off all notifications unless it was like texting or somebody directly mentions me on Twitter, or somebody tags me in a photo on Instagram. Like I want to see that stuff, but don't tell me like, hey, you haven't posted in a while. Here's 10 people that have posted. That stuff I don't need to see. And that's the part where they're trying to reel you back in because they've noticed you haven't spent the time they want you to so far. So
I'd love to talk about that, because I thought that was the most interesting point in the whole thing. Of
that was the one like solution that they offered that I thought like, thank you. That's helpful.
Well, I mean, but to kind of like, you know, combat that, you have the option. I have no notifications on my phone except for texting and calls. You have.
But what I mean, before seeing that, I wasn't cognizantly aware. Like Uber was like hitting me up and Postmates was hitting me up daily. But then when I thought about it, I'm like, damn, like even YouTube's like, we have a recommended video for you. And it's like literally like a notification on my home screen. And I'm just like, that's when they said that, I'm like, it's true. Like, I always think of a notification as an app mention or a text message, but that stuff is like, it's at least taking brain power from me that I'd rather put somewhere else.
Yeah. Like I said, I mean, as I talked about, like for my mental health, I have no notifications on my phone.
Smart.
If I want to look at it, I will. But I kind of learned that early on because it was just too much.
Sometimes there's different ways that like remind you about that. But remember back in the day, voicemails, you didn't know if you had a voicemail unless you dialed in and checked if you had voicemails. So to your point, you could turn off text notifications and every 3 hours when you pick your phone up, you can see if you got a text. It's not that big of a deal. So.
Well, the guy mentioned that, right? Like they'll send you an email or notification. It's like, hey, you got tagged in a photo, but they don't show you the photo. They want you to click the notification.
Yes, they want you in the app because then they know they got you scrolling.
Right. And
so that part,
a small change you can make towards positivity. Like, can you reverse engineer that where and they're never going to do this, of course, because it's less time on the app, but they're so good at tricking your brain into getting on these things. Can they reverse course a little bit and use that for a positive?
All right. So to end this, I think we learned a few things. One, let's try to limit notifications. I think less is more. Two, I think social obviously does an amazing, great things. It's provided great careers for all three of us. It's raised tons of money for terrible diseases. It's saved people from tyranny and terrible things around the globe. It's reunited family members, but also we have to always look at, all right, like I think, and the engineers even admitted this, like we added the like button because we thought like people would really love that. We didn't understand that was going to be such like a mental health issue long term. So what I will say, I don't believe any of these social networks cognitively said, let's do something bad here. But like anytime you release a new product, you released a new technology, there's things that you have to kind of tweak in order to make it a little bit more healthy or to work better. So I guess I'll give you guys your final thoughts on, I guess, A, what you learn, and B, if there's any like solutions or positivity you can drop. Will?
Will?
Yeah, Liz, I'm going first. Don't you know
that?
Okay. No, overall, I think like you said, there is a lot of positives. There's, of course, a ton of negatives. And I think you just need to be smart. And even if it's little things like turn off your notifications, unfollow some toxic people, just try to be aware of, hey, I've been on my phone for like an hour. Let's put this down. I think the more you can do that kind of stuff and just use it as it's meant to be needed, like the guy said with the like button, I think ultimately that'll serve everybody better. But it's, we have a lot of problems as a country and as a society, and these things are not slowing down. So I think. Yeah,
and I think too, like it's not going to be solved, no offense, but you guys have seen those hearings, like with no offense, but like a lot much older Congress people that have no idea what social is, and it's kind of like comical when you see them ask Zuckerberg or anybody else questions. They're not going to be able to solve that. I think people that have worked at, like the people that in the documentary, like engineers and people that have worked there and understand social, they maybe can be the consultants and say, hey, this is a recommendation. This is what the data is showing. This is maybe ways that we can combat anything bad. We don't want young teen girls committing suicide. And if there's anything we can do to help solve that, even if it's a small percentage, any life will be amazing there to help that problem. So anyways, I think that's where I think we need to get to is like smart people that understand the networks that have been inside those organizations can maybe provide a couple different reform options. So like Liz said, these social media networks have a little bit of oversight, much like the tobacco industry does, the alcohol industry, et cetera.
And it seems like the main guy was doing that, the company that he co-founded with a couple of other people. It seems like they were at least trying to get that message out there. So I give them credit for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I learned and what I really loved about the documentary was the point of views from all of the former executives. Yeah. And I liked how in the beginning, they were clearly nervous to speak about their experiences working at these companies. They were like, should I call my lawyer? So that for me just highlighted kind of everything that sums up for me is that these companies are humongous and they have so much power and that needs to be regulated. And I think that just really kind of expands to everything that they talked about. And I also really enjoyed hearing the point of views of these people from the beginnings of Instagram, beginnings of Pinterest, because these social media networks did start so elementary and they were for one purpose and one purpose only. And it's just evolved. But things evolved as society evolves. And again, I think that also has made a huge impact, obviously, on social media, but our entire culture and our entire world.
We've even learned stuff with, our company has evolved, right? Like we've learned stuff through personality tests in our organization that some people feel if you give them what's it called, like a positive shout out in front of the group, some people don't like that. They feel like that you're almost undermining. They're like, wait, why are you like giving me a compliment? What are you saying? I'm not usually doing a good job, but only today. Like it's weird, right? So you evolve as a company, all those things have to evolve over time, and you learn stuff as kind of the product or the company kind of gets older and things like that. Yeah, I will say my final thought is, like you said, Liz, the social networks, their main objective is to connect advertisers, aka the dollars that are being spent, to the exact demographic they want to. If they can take more data, whether it's like location data or your activity history or who you like, whatever that may be, to get them to be able to zero in more on that demographic that people are paying for, they're going to do that. That's just in the best interest of a capitalist, type of economy. They're going to get that data. So, you have to, I think, have some type of reform on the top, because it's in their best interest to zero in on that stuff. And if for whatever reason they feel like that's not good, there has to be, I think, an outside organization that can make sure they don't do anything bad with the data, or they take more than they actually need. Because, it could be true that since Facebook is on my phone, they know every single place I've been over the last, 7 years, and can break.
They're listening.
Huh?
They're listening. That's the thing. They're
listening. So I'm saying they also can break down. Like, just so you know, David Brickley for the last 6 months has gone to this restaurant around 5:07 p.m. daily after he gets off of work. So can that data be useful for you as a marketer? Like, yeah, potentially, if I'm a new restaurant in the area. So they're gonna take that data, even if they're not using it, which I really believe there's a lot of stuff they're not using, but it's on a server that they can potentially tap into if business objectives need it. So anyways.
Did you guys catch the Pinterest guy? That was like the funniest part of the whole thing to me. And he's like, I'm at work building this platform to get people interested in my app, and I'm going home and I'm falling.
Addicted. Yeah, exactly.
He's in the pantry scrolling through Pinterest.
Yeah, exactly. Well, cool. Thanks so much for, I know we were kind of like talking around the virtual office these days about what we thought about it and watching it and things like that. So I wanted to bring you both in. Of course, Liz, Director of Data and Strategy, and Producer Will, also on our partnerships team at STN Digital. So thank you so much, guys, for our team, for joining us. And thank you for listening as well. Will, what do we usually ask the great listeners? I think it's a 5-star review. I think it's a
5-star. Yeah, 5 stars, of course. And I'm sure Liz already has.
Yeah, of course she has.
Of course.
The laughter is interesting in that situation. No. All right. Thank you so much for listening. It's a business social podcast. I'm your host, David Brickley. It has been powered by STN Digital.